So what we're going to run through here today is we're going to run through the creation of a custom model games collection. Uh, what are these? What are custom model games? In the same way that they're basically long variations that you map out in the same way that you might look at a model game played by a strong player. You're going to map out a game length variation uh, with ideas that are strong ideas in positions that you're likely to see in the openings you play. Why do they work? So you could, of course, try to learn strong ideas in lots of different positions in an isolated way. But when you learn them in a full game or a long game, then you connect those ideas together. Ideas that you think, plans that you play in the opening are related to plans that you play or have to play and know in the middle game, and are related to things that you have to know and play in the end game. And by chaining them together, you chunk them from a memory perspective. So it's easier to remember. Uh, Also, you get to pick. So if you choose a model game played by a strong player, there might be a lot of good plans in there, but they're not necessarily the ones that you would play yourself or would like to play. You might like some of them, but not others of them. Because you're customizing it, you get to select ones that work well. And because you're going to be using an engine, they're going to be strong ideas as well. Okay, so we are going to work through. This is going to be super short. Usually, when you're trying to map out a number of games to play and learn an opening, for example, you might be in the tens or hundreds of lines that you would learn. In fact, Chessable has a 100 series, meaning like courses that have no more than 100 variations in them, and they're thought to be small. Uh, so here we're going to try and do it with 12, and this is going to be a complete coverage of a line with white, the English opening. That's going to be super small, too small, really, but it's just a sample. You can certainly use it, but it's going to have some gaps. We're trying to minimize those gaps, but 12 is pretty small. And the target opponent, and this is another key, it's going to be players rated 1200 to 1800 in elite chess. And knowing this is really important because players that are stronger are likely to play different moves than players that are weaker. And so if you're preparing for someone who's 1600 in elite chess, or for players of that level, you shouldn't be looking at GM games because they're going to be playing different moves entirely than the ones you're actually likely to see. So that's the point. You need to know who you're targeting when you create these, so that you know what's likely. Okay, so we're going to run through here. Now there are two places when I create a custom model games collection. Typically, I like to put it in two different places: a spreadsheet and a lichess study. So we're going to show you how to do both those things. I'm going to start with a spreadsheet. So here, and I'm just going to make a copy of this to start with. And so something like this. Okay, and then I'm going to go into lichess and start. This is the study page. I'm going to start a new study. We're going to call this sample. Okay. And create a new chapter. All right. So the first thing to do when I'm start to map out, and I'm just going to here not actually create any lines. I'm going to sort of map out what lines I'm going to need to create. So I'm going to start out with looking at, okay, it's 1200 to 1800, and I don't want to include bullet or hyperbullet. Those are a little short for what I'm looking at. But this range of games is what we're going to be looking at. And we're going to be looking at C4. So I want to know what lines that I'm going to need to map out. So the first thing to recognize is that E5, this move is played relatively frequently, but not, over 50% or anything like that, 37% of the time. So if I'm mapping out 12 lines, somewhere around 4 of them should be E5. And maybe 2 of them should be knight f6, and maybe 2, between 1 and 2 should be C5, but we can look at it. But this one actually, C5 is pretty different than either of these two, really. and is different than these other things down here. C5 kind of stand on its own. So I want to make sure we get some decent coverage with 2 lines. Even 2 is too short, but we're going to get some, make sure I favor it a little bit. So, and then, so that's 4, 2, and 2. And then, see, there starts to be a lot of lines here. We're only doing 12, and I've already got, what is that, 8 accounted for. So, okay, so they're going to, first we're going to write that down. In our sample sheet, so I'm going to put it in the white section. So it's just going to have 12 lines. And they are all going to start with C4. And then, as I said, 4 of them are going to have E5. 2 of them are going to have knight F6. And then 2 of them are going to have C5. All right. So there's going to be some judgment here in which of these moves I'm going to include. The first thing to recognize, I only have 4 lines left that I want to look at. And also, this is all my cohort, but I do care a little bit about what strong players play as well. So I can see here, for example, C6 shows up 8% of the time here. It only shows up 4% here. It might not even make my list if I were just looking at the target cohort, this weaker level cohort, but it definitely would make the list if I were looking just at masters. So I think I'm inclined to favor it. Also, I happen to know that G6 and knight F6 often go together. So since I'm giving this one 2 lines, maybe I can kind of fudge it and not include G6. So, all right. You're going to have at least 1 line with E6, D5, and C6. I'm going to write those in. Which obviously, I need these ones. They're relatively frequent. E6, D5, and C6. And that leaves me with one extra. I could do G6, or another knight F6, because especially if I'm using it to cover G6 and knight F6 together. But I think I'm going to leave it. I'm going to say, okay, I need at least these. This is a minimum, but maybe later if I decide I really need another line, I'll sort of decide as I've going through that I'm, what this should be. Okay. And so I am set up. I am going to start with E5. And the plan is to do a video on each of these lines that I create separately. And so I will see you in the next video.